My name is Lena, and I still feel the echo of his footsteps fading down that aisle. I remember slipping into my sister's wedding dress in the quiet haze of early morning, the fabric cool and light against my skin. I could hear laughter drifting down the hall, bridesmaids sharing secrets, the air charged with excitement. My fingers trembled as I fastened the last button at the back, the weight of silk and tulle anchoring me to the moment. I took a shaky breath, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, trying to steady the fluttering in my chest. I wanted to believe everything would be perfect. We'd planned this day for months, every flower, every note of the ceremony, every soft candlelit touch of the reception. Standing in the doorway of the bridal suite, I felt a warm rush of love whenever I thought of him, the way he used to cup my face, the gentle tilt of his head when he whispered my name. But that morning, there was a quiet crack of something shifting underneath it all, like an unseen fissure growing in slow motion. I stepped out into the back garden where the ceremony was set. Rows of white chairs framed a wooden arch draped in blush roses, and I could see guests murmuring beneath the shade of ancient oaks. My sister was glowing, eyes shining as she took her place at the front. My heart shouldn't have felt this tight, but there it was, a tremor, a hesitation. My sister caught my eye and smiled, and I returned it, though my lips felt heavy, as if coated in honey. And then I saw him. He appeared at the end of the aisle, but he wasn't carrying the calm confidence I expected. His shoulders were slumped, his steps slow, and there was a shift in his gaze that stopped me cold. He looked past me, eyes distant, like he was trying to pinpoint something behind the trees. I forced myself to hold my breath, to steady my hands against the slight tremor that ran through me. He reached the front and paused. My sister's smile wavered. That pause stretched, just a beat too long, like a held note in a song that never lands. I felt a rise of heat in my cheeks, an echo of dread that curled in my stomach. My fingers clenched around my bouquet so tightly the ribbons bit into my palm. I swallowed, tasting bitterness on my tongue. He took my hand, his skin was cooler than I remembered. I looked into his eyes, hoping to find warmth, reassurance, anything. And I saw a flicker of guilt, a shadow of regret. He swallowed, lips parting, and I braced for the words that would change everything. "I can't do this," he said, voice low and uneven. My heart lurched, knuckles turning white around the stems of my flowers. My breath hitched. Around us, there was a soft stir of gasps and rustling fabric, but everything felt distant, as though I was watching someone else's story unfold. My cheeks burned and my mouth felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, every beat a hammer blow. My sister stepped forward, confusion twisting her face. He let go of my hand and backed away, shoulders slumping further. His eyes darted between us, and then he turned and walked down the aisle without looking back. Every step echoed so loud in my ears that I felt like I could feel the impact in my bones. I stood frozen, the world tilting around me. My dress felt too tight, the air too thick. My sister grabbed my arm, her voice trembling as she asked if I was okay. I opened my mouth, but only a choked sound came out. My thoughts were a jumble of shock and fury and heartbreak, all twisted together. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into a white chair, the seat cold against my thighs. My fingers loosened on the bouquet, petals scattering on the grass. I could feel tears pricking at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I pressed my lips together, tasting the sharp sting of resolve. I would not crumble in that moment. Not like this. That night, I lay awake replaying his retreating figure, heart pounding with betrayal. And somewhere deep in me, I felt the first spark of something fierce, a promise that he would regret walking away. I couldn't sleep after that afternoon, my mind was a storm, you know? I kept replaying his last look, that flicker of guilt in his eyes as he walked away. My hands trembled every time I thought about it, like they had a life of their own, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like someone was hammering inside my chest. I lay in that hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, its pattern blurred through my tears, and I knew I couldn't just wait for him to regret it on his own. I needed to make him feel the weight of betrayal. So I started small. I called the florist who'd arranged the wedding blooms and told her I'd forgotten to ask about repurposing the centerpieces. I spoke softly, voice steady despite the quiver in my throat, and asked if she could deliver them somewhere else. She asked where, and I paused, my jaw locked, mouth dry, before giving her the address where he'd stay that night. I could almost taste the thrill as I hung up. My pulse was so loud in my ears I thought it might drown out the hum of the city around me. Later, I drove past his apartment complex, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. In the passenger seat lay the roses, once symbols of love, now weapons of cold revenge. I parked a block away, hands slick on the steering wheel, and watched him through the tinted glass. He was on his phone, pacing, oblivious to the bundle of petals waiting by his door. I slipped out, breath catching in my throat, and carried the flowers like they were fragile, when really each thorn was a promise: you'll pay for what you did. I left them on his doorstep, arranged in that perfect circle they'd made at the reception. Then I drove off before he could see me, chest tight with laughter I tried to swallow. I told myself it was just the beginning. I needed to push him, to unsettle him, to watch him scramble for something he'd thrown away without a second thought. The next day, I spotted him at a cafe, his face pale, eyes darting, as he fumbled with his coffee. I hovered nearby, pretending to read a magazine, but I could feel every tremor in my own body. My pulse skipped whenever he glanced up, as if he sensed me, as if he felt my presence like a cold wind blowing through an open window. I almost wanted him to look again, just to see that same flicker of panic I'd seen before. I left without a word. But inside, I was twisting with delight. I could taste the electricity of revenge, sharp and exhilarating, like biting into unripe fruit. It made my mouth water. My skin felt alive, nerves buzzing, each step charged with anticipation. That evening, I sent him a message, from an anonymous number, claiming I'd found something he'd lost at the wedding. I described a small silver locket he'd worn on a chain around his neck, the one he'd removed before walking down the aisle. I told him I'd keep it safe, but only if he called me. My fingers hovered over the send button, hard in my throat, until I gave in and tapped it. Moments later, my phone buzzed. His name flashed. My whole body tightened, my spine went rigid, chest constricting, as I answered. He sounded different. Shaky. I let him waste minutes begging, stumbling over words, until I finally asked him why he'd abandoned me. He stumbled again, denying it, then apologizing, then withdrawing. I felt a wave of triumph wash over me. I held that call as precious evidence that he was unsettled. I hung up before he could ask for the locket back. I smiled softly, though my lips felt stiff, and whispered into the darkness of my apartment, "I'm just getting started." A soft shiver ran down my spine, and I welcomed it, because it meant I still had power. I still had control. That night, I lay awake again, only this time my mind wasn't a storm but a sharp line, focused and unyielding. Revenge wasn't a distant hope, it was a path I was already walking, one step at a time. My body hummed with determination, every nerve ending alive with the promise that he would regret the day he ever thought he could leave me without consequences. I woke with a tight knot in my stomach, kind of like I'd swallowed glass. The day felt charged, as though the air itself was waiting for something to break. My body hummed with anticipation and dread, skin prickling at every sound. I had two pieces of evidence that would tip the scales, proofs that would force him to feel the sting of what he'd done. First, the photo. I'd borrowed his unlocked phone when he left it charging, and found a shot he'd taken at the reception. In it, he was leaning close to someone else, lips brushing her hair as she laughed. I watched their shadows merge behind her, and my chest twisted. I printed it on glossy paper, edges ragged from the old printer, and tucked it into a crisp envelope. Second, the message screenshot. I'd intercepted it by lending him my phone, asking him to check a bogus notification. While he typed, I'd opened his messages and snapped a quick photo. It read, "I can't keep lying to you. I'm sorry." No context, no names, just his confession in black and white. I forwarded that to my anonymous account and printed it too, the pixels glaring back at me. Proof 1, the glossy photo, blurred at the edges, showing him with another woman at the wedding. He looked so content, her hand resting on his shoulder, oblivious to the vows he'd left behind. Proof 2, the screenshot of his message, his own words admitting he was deceiving me, like a knife pressed to my chest. I drove to the small cafe near his office. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the envelope, when I slipped it onto his table. I watched from across the room, heart pounding, throat dry, as he found it. His brows knotted together, like he'd just realized how heavy the weight of paper could feel. He opened the envelope with a trembling finger and gasped. I stood up and walked over, every step echoing in my ears. My palms were slick with sweat, and my knees felt weak, but I held my chin high. He looked up at me, eyes wide, mouth half open. I could see guilt ricocheting across his face. Without saying a word, I pointed at the photo. His eyes darted to it, then back to me. His jaw pressed into a hard line. Then I dropped the second printout, his message, onto the table. The cafe fell silent around us, as though the world had paused, waiting for his answer. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the photo, but I grabbed his wrist, making him flinch. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. Do you see this? Do you feel it? My chest tightened, tears threatened, but I blinked them back. He opened his mouth, started to say sorry again, but no apology could fix this. He stuttered, voice low and broken. Lena. His words came out in fragments, shame dripping from each syllable. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would crack my ribs. I pressed closer, heat collapsing any distance between us. My voice dropped to a whisper, I trusted you. Every word cut through the hush. He crumpled into the seat, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. I felt a flicker of pity, that soft ache of compassion, but it died under the surge of triumph. I watched him unravel, every breath shaky, tears staining his cheeks. He was unmasked, no smoother half-smile, no excuses left. I stepped back, letting the silence hang. My chest rose and fell, eyes stinging. He looked up one last time, pleading. Then he sank his gaze to the table, defeated. I turned and walked away, back into the crisp air, letting his regret chase me down the sidewalk. My heartbeat settled into a steady rhythm, each beat an echo of power reclaimed. And I knew I'd only just begun. I spent the morning replaying every heartbeat of that moment in the cafe, feeling my chest tighten each time his shameful gaze flicked up at me. My hands trembled as I lit a cigarette on my balcony, smoke curling around my fingers and mingling with the cold breeze. The city felt distant, like a stage set I'd walked off but could never fully escape. My skin tingled with adrenaline, every nerve ending alive to possibility. I flicked ash onto the concrete ledge and watched it fall. Later, I sharpened my plan while pacing the length of my apartment, walls closing in under the weight of anticipation. Revenge wasn't a single act, I reminded myself, it was a performance, a slow-burning fire that would leave him gutted. I arranged the prints from the cafe on my coffee table, the photo, the message, and now I needed something more intimate. I closed my eyes and pictured his handwriting, the way he used to sign, forever, at the end of his texts. My gut clenched. I rifled through my things until I found a stack of old letters, love notes he'd never thrown away. Each one was scrawled in ink, promises and pet names folded into crisp white paper. My pulse thudded as I read the lines that once made me melt. You're my world, nothing scares me when you're near. I ran my thumb over the loops of his letters, tasting both nostalgia and revulsion on my tongue. When I was sure his heart was on record, I slid them into an envelope marked urgent. That afternoon, I called the florist again and booked 12 identical bouquets, roses in various shades of pink, each wrapped in delicate tissue. My voice was calm when I gave her addresses, his office lobby, his gym locker room, and even the valet entrance at his favorite restaurant. I could feel my pulse slow as I hung up, satisfaction pooling in my chest like warm honey. It was methodical, surgical, I was in control. By early evening, my phone buzzed with notifications. Photos arrived from friends who'd polled the cafe staff, the bouquets were everywhere, flooding his world with reminders of what he'd abandoned. I pictured him in his tailored suit, sleeves rolled up, angrily tearing petals off stems as he tried to keep his composure. I closed my eyes and let out a soft laugh, breath trembling as I imagined the way his calm facade would crack. That night, I slipped into something elegant and dark before slipping out to the restaurant where I'd reserved a table, under his name, of course. I arrived early, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The manager led me past the lobby, where a floral cascade trailed across the floor, and into a private alcove. Candlelight flickered off the dark wood, casting long shadows. I sank into the seat, back straight, hands folded in my lap. My skin felt almost too sensitive, each brush of air like a caress. I ordered a glass of red wine and waited. My pulse slowed, each beat deliberate. When he finally arrived, his face was a storm, dark circles under his eyes, suit jacket crumpled at the shoulders. He froze for a heartbeat, mouth parting like he wanted to plead. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I lifted my glass, met his gaze, and sipped slowly, feeling the warmth spread through me. He stood there, silent, hands clenched at his sides. I leaned forward, voice soft but firm, "I hope you like flowers." He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the arrangement spilling onto the table between us, roses and petals everywhere. His jaw clenched, and I saw the war in his eyes, shame and panic and something like regret. My pulse thundered in my ears, a triumphant drumbeat. I set down my glass and let the silence stretch, watching the storm ripple across his face. Then I smiled, just a small tilt of my lips, and whispered, "This is only the beginning." My skin tingled, muscles coiled. He looked like a man realizing he'd lost more than he'd ever owned. And I, steady and unbroken, felt the cold thrill of victory settle in my bones. I woke to the dull ache of regret lingering in my bones, even though it wasn't mine to bear. The room smelled of stale wine and rose petals, evidence of last night's confrontation. My skin still tingled from the candlelight and his stunned silence across that table. I pressed a palm to my forehead, feeling the pulse there pound with anticipation. I knew I had to keep the momentum. Revenge was a wildfire, and I couldn't afford to let it smolder into ashes. I spent the morning drafting an anonymous invitation. I found an elegant template online, no names, just a faint watermark of gold filigree and the words, "You're invited to a private gathering. Come alone." My fingers hovered over the keyboard as memories flashed, the way his eyes had darted when he saw the envelopes at his door, the tight line of his lips when he finally sat across from me. I aimed to replicate that uncertainty, that delicious unease. By midday, I'd printed 50 invitations on thick cardstock and slipped them into the mailboxes of his closest friends, people he trusted, people who'd shown up to celebrate him with me. My heart pounded as I walked down the hallway, sliding each envelope behind cluster key doors. My legs trembled, but I kept my breath steady. I imagined their faces when they read the invite, confusion, suspicion, the slow bloom of curiosity that would send them scrambling for exits and excuses. That afternoon, I recruited my sister under the guise of helping me with wedding planning. She arrived in a sundress, hair pulled back, her eyes curious but unreadable. I poured 2 cups of tea, hands smooth now, voice calm. "I've got these invites," I said, sliding the stack across the table. She picked one up, brow furrowed. "Who's this for?" she asked, voice low. I leaned back, sipping my tea. "For someone who really needs to think about what they did," I said quietly. A flicker of understanding passed through her expression. She nodded once, softly. "Let me help," she whispered. Together, we mapped out the event, a private tasting at the same vineyard where his family had hosted last year's summer fete. We chose twilight to cast long shadows through the vines. We arranged for a small band to play soft jazz, the kind he once claimed he loved. Every detail was calibrated to perfection, ambience that hinted at celebration, but with empty chairs and unanswered questions. That evening, I watched from my balcony as the invitations arrived on doorsteps across town. The sky was painted in lavender and rose, and I felt that familiar coil of electricity in my chest. I pictured him checking his mailbox, pulling out one card, turning it over in his hands. Would he dare attend? My pulse fluttered at the thought. A few nights later, under a sky dotted with early stars, I drove out to the vineyard. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, and I felt a soft thrill as I stepped out. Lanterns glowed along the approach, their light trembling in the breeze. Inside the tasting room, rows of empty seats faced a small stage draped in white linen. A table held crystal flutes and a single bottle of his favorite rose, unopened, waiting. I slipped behind a pillar, heart racing. Moments later, headlights swept across the lawn. His car rolled to a stop at the entrance. He stepped out, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. No host, no crowd, just that lone bottle and the silent chairs. He frowned, then picked up an invitation from a table by the door. He read it, lips parting. His eyes darted around, confusion rippling through him like a tremor. He stepped into the tasting room, each footfall echoing. I could see his jaw working as he realized the invitation was from me. My pulse thundered in my ears. He picked up the rose, uncorked it, and poured a glass, swirling the liquid against the lantern light. He raised it in the empty room, as though toasting absent friends. My breath caught. Then the band began to play, soft saxophone notes drifting through the open doors. I stepped into the glow, hands folded before me. His eyes snapped to me, shock flaring bright. The glass wobbled in his hand. Silence fell like a shroud. I walked forward, every step measured, heels clicking on the stone floor. My skin felt electric under the lantern glow. I stopped a few feet from him and smiled, slow, deliberate. "Welcome," I said, voice soft but unwavering. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing as though seeking words that wouldn't come. I gestured at the empty chairs. "I invited everyone who matters," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You walked away from me in front of everyone I love. Tonight, you get to sit alone with your choices." His hand tightened around the glass, fingers whitening. The wine sloshed inside, droplets catching the light. He opened his mouth, but I held up a finger. "No apologies," I said. "Tonight is for reflection." A single tear slid down his cheek. I watched it gleam, felt a pang of something, remorse? But I turned my head, letting him see my profile. The lantern light flickered, casting shadows across the vines behind me. I took a steady breath, tasting the cold clarity of victory. In that charged silence, he realized he couldn't undo what he'd done. And I, standing tall amid empty chairs, felt the last echoes of heartbreak settle into silence, and the hard, beautiful quiet of retribution. I woke to the echo of that vineyard, like the ground beneath me had shifted and never settled. My muscles tightened each time I thought of his lone figure amidst empty chairs, the soft jazz drifting through rows of grapes. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, hands trembling, and watched the steam curl upward like a question I couldn't answer. I felt a twinge of guilt, like maybe I'd gone too far, then pushed it down under a wave of cold resolve. I spent a few hours scrolling through his social feed, noting every post he'd tagged me in, every photo I'd smiled in. My heart pounded at the sight of our faces side by side, the world thinking we were happy. I felt my jaw lock, breathing tight, imagining those images in strangers' hands. I bookmarked them all with a purpose, to pull each one down, to replace every memory he'd left behind with reminders of his shame. That afternoon, I drafted an email, anonymous, of course, addressed to his entire contact list, family, friends, colleagues. I hesitated over the subject line, fingers hovering above the keys. My pulse thudded like a warning drum as I typed, "Important. Please read before it's too late." I sighed, tasting bitterness on my tongue, and hit send. My chest seized the moment it left my outbox, like I'd unleashed a torrent I couldn't contain. Within minutes, my phone lit up. Notifications trickled in, messages from his sister asking what it meant, from his best friend demanding details, from a coworker forwarding the email as if it were urgent news. My skin pricked at the thought of his inbox filling with doubt and alarm. I leaned back, coffee growing cold, feeling the sharp zing of power pulsing through my veins. I needed to see his reaction firsthand. So I parked outside his office building that evening, heart flickering between dread and anticipation. I could almost feel his panic through the tinted glass. When he rushed out, coat flared behind him, hair tousled, his face was pale, eyes wide. He glanced around, spotted me leaning against my car, arms crossed. His steps faltered. I walked over, boots clicking on the pavement. My breath caught as he approached, voice low. "What did you do?" he asked, jaw tight, gaze flickering across my face as if I were a stranger. My chest throbbed at the sound of his fear. I let a slow smile slip across my lips. "I just reminded them," I said softly, voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "Of who you really are." He swallowed hard, voice shaking. "You can't do that." His hands shook so badly that he looked ready to drop his briefcase. I inhaled a breath of evening air, tasting both triumph and a strange ache, like watching someone drown when a part of me still cared. I pushed my shoulders back, feeling every muscle tense with purpose. "Oh, but I already did." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His grip was rough, desperation cracking his tone. "This isn't you," he hissed. My heart lurched at the closeness, at the memory of his touch, but I pulled free, letting my fingers slip through his. My skin tingled with adrenaline. "No," I whispered, voice firm. "It's exactly who I need to be." I stepped aside, letting him see his phone screen, message threads flooding with questions, headed straight for his reputation. His eyes flicked back and forth, panic bursting through his composure. I could almost smell the fear rising off him, sharp and metallic. My chest swelled with victory, but beneath it, a dull hum of something like sorrow nestled in my ribs. He turned away, shoulders hunching as he scrolled frantically. I watched him, heartbeat slowing to a steady drum of satisfaction and regret intertwined. I lifted my chin and whispered to the twilight sky, "You should have stayed." Then I walked away into the gathering dusk, each step heavy with the weight of what I'd become, and what I'd reclaimed. That morning, I woke to the dull hum of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. My skin prickled, like every nerve was strung tight, and I could feel the steady ache in my jaw from clenching my teeth. A wave of exhaustion rolled through me, but beneath it, a flame of anticipation flickered. I knew today would demand something more. I sat up, the sheets slipping from my shoulders as I ran a hand through my hair. My fingertips grazed the small scar above my eyebrow, a reminder of how close he'd come to unraveling me. I closed my eyes and let out a breath that trembled in my chest. Outside, the sky was a heaviness of gray, clouds dragging themselves across the horizon. I grabbed my laptop and swiped through the email thread again. The subject line stared back, "Important. Please read before it's too late." My heart fluttered, ribs tightening as I pictured his face when he saw it. Messages were flooding in, friends, colleagues, relatives, each one a ripple of doubt in his carefully curated world. I pressed my lips together, tasting bitterness on my tongue. This wasn't enough. I needed him to confront this in person. So, I drafted a final message. My fingers hovered, breathing uneven as I typed, "Meet me at the old park by the fountain if you dare." I left it and signed, letting the words hover between threat and invitation. I watched the cursor blink, each blink a heartbeat. Then I sent it. My chest pulsed, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I closed the laptop and stood, legs unsteady as I walked to the mirror. My reflection looked foreign, cheeks hollowed, eyes bright with purpose. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling the cold surface under my skin. I whispered, "This is it." The park was vacant when I arrived, benches carved by time, the fountain dry and silent. Dusk draped the place in soft shadows, twisting the trees into silent sentinels. My pulse thundered as I paced along the path. Leaves crunched under my boots, each step echoing in the hollow stillness. I checked my phone, no response yet. My breath hitched, chest tightening as if I were underwater. Then I heard footsteps, slow, hesitant, approaching on the gravel. I turned, heart thundering so loud I feared he'd hear it. He appeared in the dim light, coat collar raised, shoulders slumped. He looked uncertain. His eyes flicked to the empty fountain, then to me. I could see the tremor in his lips, the way his hands shook at his sides. My own hands tingled, cold thrill mixing with an ache I couldn't name. I folded my arms, voice catching as I said, "You came." He swallowed hard, jaw working. "Why are we here?" he asked, voice low and rough. Silence stretched until my lungs burned. I took a step forward, boots scuffing the pavement. "You need to say it," I murmured. His brow furrowed, confusion giving way to shame. He clenched his fists, knuckles whitening. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm sorry." I felt my chest tilt, body responding to the sorrow in his tone. My heart fluttered, anguish tangled with triumph. But I remembered the betrayal etched into every moment. I shook my head, lips pressed in a thin line. "You? Sorry?" I asked, voice trembling. He stared at the ground, shoulders sagging. I watched a tear slip down his face, catching the last light. My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to collapse, to let everything break open. Instead, I straightened, voice firm even as it shook. "Look around," I said, gesturing to the empty park. "No friends, no witnesses, only you and me." He lifted his gaze, eyes glossy. "What do you want?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. I inhaled slowly, tasting metal on my tongue. "I want you to feel the weight of your choices," I said. My words hovered in the chilly air. He took a step toward me, uncertainty and guilt tangled in his posture. "Please," he begged, voice breaking. My chest heaved, body trembling. I took a breath, letting frustration and pity crash together. "Get on your knees," I said, voice low. His face drained of color. I could feel the electricity between us, power and vulnerability swirling. He hesitated, then sank to his knees. Pavement bit into his knees, rough and unyielding. His hands dropped to his thighs, shoulders quivering. I watched him, breath catching. My heart twisted as I looked at him there, broken, exposed. Part of me ached with compassion. But the fire of revenge smoldered stronger. I stepped closer, voice soft, "Repeat after me," his head lifted, eyes wide. I whispered the words he owed me, the vow he'd used and discarded. He swallowed, voice trembling as he echoed them. The air held every syllable, heavy with shame. When he finished, tears streaked his cheeks. My body shook as I watched the truth hang between us. I felt both triumphant and hollow. He looked up, desperation and remorse shining in his eyes. I took a final step away, voice barely audible, "This is your penance." He remained on his knees, shoulders sagging as night settled deeper. I turned my back, walking into the hush of the evening. My skin prickled in the cool air. My chest felt both empty and full, like a battlefield at dawn. And I knew I'd given him exactly what he deserved. Tonight, revenge had found its voice. And I, standing alone, felt the weight of every choice pressing against my ribs. I slipped into my car before dawn, headlights slicing through the mist that clung to the empty streets. My body hummed with tension, every nerve ending poised like a drawn bowstring. I'd spent the night drafting one final blow, an email to his boss, complete with the photo of him leaning into that other woman and a link to the anonymous thread tearing through his contacts. It was surgical, precise, and utterly irreversible. By the time I reached his office building, the sky was a soft gray wash. I parked a few blocks away, heart beating so loud I felt each thump in my temples. I slipped inside through the side entrance, security was lax this early, and crept to the mailroom. My fingers wrapped around a stack of printed emails, crisply folded, each addressed to his department head with the subject line, "Urgent, Professional Conduct Concern." My breath caught as I slid them into the outgoing bin, mingling them with those days' actual memos. One wrong moment and I'd be exposed, but the risk only sharpened my focus. I left before anyone stirred, chest tightening as I imagined his boss's reaction. Would she read the first line, his cheating confession, and feel shock? Would the rest of his colleagues murmur behind closed doors, speculating about his integrity? I felt a rush of triumph, tempered by a flicker of unease. But this was the culmination of every restless night, every moment his betrayal had tortured my mind. I needed him unmasked at work, where he'd once felt invincible. Later, I found a quiet cafe across the street. I sat in the corner, laptop open but ignored, watching the office windows. Employees began to trickle in, suits and coffee cups in hand. My pulse quickened when I saw him emerge, jacket over his arm, phone pressed to his ear. His shoulders were tense, gait hurried. I leaned forward, heart in my throat. He reached the front steps, paused, and dug into his pocket, pulling out his phone, eyes skimming the screen. I held my breath. His chest tightened, shoulders slumped. He looked around, as though seeking an escape route, then slipped the phone back and ducked inside. I watched him disappear, feeling a cold surge of satisfaction. Revenge wasn't about watching from afar, it was about witnessing the moment his world fractured. I closed my laptop, legs shaking, and headed home. The afternoon sun had warmed the pavement, but I felt a chill pulsing through me. I paced my living room, waiting for confirmation that my plan had worked. My phone buzzed, an anonymous tip of a late meeting called by his boss, something urgent involving HR. Threads spun through my mind. He'd be called in to explain himself, face the woman from the photo, defend his reputation before everyone who once trusted him. My chest fluttered at the thought. That evening, I couldn't stay still. I walked through my apartment like a restless ghost, scanning the walls as though they might whisper back his impending downfall. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an alarm. All I wanted was proof that he was collapsing, piece by piece. I tried replaying our last conversation, the way his voice broke when he begged for mercy. A flicker of guilt rushed through my veins, but I crushed it under a wave of determined coldness. Night fell without answers. My phone lay silent beside me, the glow of its screen mocking my impatience. I felt exposed, like a hunter waiting too long for prey, and the doubt slackened my grip. What if he'd managed to delete the emails? What if his boss had recognized the thread as malicious? Sweat beaded at my temples. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, steadying the tremor in my hands. And then, just as I was on the verge of sinking into restless despair, the first chime arrived, a forwarded HR memo, stamped confidential, stating that a formal inquiry would begin tomorrow. I stared at the screen, chest hammering, as relief and exhilaration collided inside me. He would walk into that meeting alone, under a cloud of suspicion so thick he couldn't breathe. I sank onto the couch, muscles relaxing for the first time in days. My gaze drifted to the window, where the city lights flickered to life. The weight in my chest lightened, replaced by a quiet certainty. Tonight, I could finally rest. Tomorrow, his fortress of lies would crumble, and he'd understand the true cost of abandonment. Revenge had become its own pulse, steady and unyielding. And I, at last, felt the cold comfort of victory settling around my shoulders. That evening, I found myself drawn back to the courthouse plaza where his hearing had been held. The fountain at its center still whispered, water dancing over stone, and the streetlights cast pools of gold across the pavement. I stood at the edge, arms folded, feeling the rough concrete under my fingertips. My heart pounded, like it always did before I stepped into his world, and my breath caught in my throat. I watched late stragglers trickle past, a colleague pausing to whisper into a phone, his sister emerging from the side entrance, her shoulders slumped. I could almost feel their hushed shock, like a tangible thing floating in the air. I lit a cigarette, inhaling until the smoke filled my lungs and settled like a weight in my chest. The acrid burn tasted like victory, but there was a hollow echo in my ribs, too. I watched his silhouette appear under the flickering lamp by the steps, coat collar raised, gait cautious. He spotted me and hesitated, eyes widening. I crushed the cigarette under my heel, smoke curling upward, and stepped forward. He stopped short, hands slipping into his pockets. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice wavering. I could see the tremor in his lips, the dryness of his throat. My own voice sounded calm, almost too calm. I wanted to see the aftermath. I nodded toward the courthouse entrance. "How it feels when your world falls apart in public." My shoulders relaxed, though my skin prickled with anticipation. He swallowed, gaze dropping to the ground. We walked side by side without speaking, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the hush. Every so often, his shoulder brushed mine, and my body tensed, memories flickering like faulty lights. I tilted my head, noticing the way his suit hung loose, the dark circles under his eyes. He'd lost weight, like grief had hollowed him out. My chest tightened at the sight, but I pushed it down. This was justice, I told myself. He stopped at the foot of the steps, dropping his gaze to the fountain. Water rippled in circles, like disturbances spreading outward. I leaned on the stone ledge, arms crossed, and watched him study the water. "You made them read the truth," he said finally, voice low. "All of them." My pulse fluttered. "You lost their trust," I replied. My words sounded blunt, like a scalpel slicing through tension. He ran a hand through his hair, fingers trembling. His eyes met mine, brimming with something I couldn't name: regret, sorrow, fear. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, but it no longer held weight. I closed my eyes and inhaled, feeling the night air fill my lungs. I could sense the crowd's eyes on us, neighbors, reporters, passerby, everyone tuned in to this silent reckoning. When I spoke, my voice was soft, I needed them to know. I forced myself to look away, letting the lamplight sharpen the edges of my face. I felt his gaze linger, heat flickering across my skin. He took a step closer, and I smelled the faint trace of his cologne, something woodsy and familiar, which made my hands clench at my sides. A siren wailed in the distance, and the sound rattled through the stillness. I turned to leave, shoulders stiff. He followed, footsteps hesitant. At the corner, he stopped me. "What now?" he asked, eyes searching. My chest tightened, and I felt both dominion and emptiness collide inside me. I breathed out slowly, smoke from my lips trailing like a confession. "Now," I said, voice steadier than I felt, "you live with what you've done." I paused, letting the words settle. "No more safety nets." He nodded once, shoulders drooping. I noticed the way his knees looked unsteady, and for a fleeting second, I wanted to reach out, to steady him. But I let the moment pass, stepping back into the shadows. My heart thundered, but my face was still. I turned away, walking under the streetlights that stretched into the night. Behind me, I felt his gaze follow, a silent plea tangled with resignation. My hands itched, part of me still wanted to punish further, to press into the raw wound I'd created. But as I walked, I realized the echo of his footsteps had faded, and I felt an unfamiliar quiet bloom in my chest. It wasn't peace, more like the calm after a storm. I paused, letting the hush wash over me. The fountain's whisper carried on, and I watched its ripples fade, just as his world would never fully settle again. That afternoon, I felt the weight of everything pressing into my chest, like I was carrying a boulder made of memory and anger. My hands shook as I sat at my desk, heart rattling so hard I kept thinking I'd hear it in my ears. Around me, the apartment was silent, only the hum of the air conditioner and the distant siren of a passing ambulance. I tapped at my laptop screen, opening the local news site where I'd arranged an anonymous tip to be sent. My pulse thundered as I scrolled through the editor's inbox, watching for any sign that my message had landed. I'd written it carefully, the truth about his betrayal, the confession I'd forced from him on his knees, and the evidence of his betrayal, the photo, the screenshot, the empty chairs at the vineyard. I'd asked them to meet me at the Fountain Plaza tonight for a world exclusive. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling as I hit send. A cold rush of relief and dread collided in my chest. By early evening, I could almost taste the tension in the air. I drove to the plaza again, headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The fountain still whispered in its pool, the water lit by soft spotlights. I felt a tremor in my knees as I climbed the steps, shoulders tight. A small cluster of cameras and microphones gathered, journalists murmuring into recorders, flashes popping. I pressed my back against a stone pillar, fingertips grazing its rough surface, and watched. Then I saw him appear at the top of the steps, coat collar turned up against the chill. His face went pale when he spotted the press, eyes widening like he'd walked into an ambush. He hesitated, shoulders hunched, before moving forward. I could see the way his breath came in shallow bursts, chest lifting and falling too fast. My own breath caught in my throat. "Mr. Donovan," a reporter called, voice sharp. "Care to comment on these accusations?" A camera light flared, and the lenses swung toward him. He swallowed, glancing around as though hoping someone would step in and save him. But the plaza was empty except for us and the reporters. I stepped out of the shadows, heart hammering so loud I thought they'd hear it through the microphones. His gaze flicked to me, panic breaking through his features. His jaw went slack. I felt a pang of something, pity. But it was swallowed by determination. "Go ahead," I said, voice trembling but clear. "Tell them why you left her at the altar. Tell them why you lied to everyone you claimed to love." My skin prickled under the spotlights. I could feel the cameras clicking, capturing every second. He closed his eyes, running a hand through his hair, face wet with tears I could see in the glaring lights. I made a terrible mistake," he began, voice raw. His words caught in his throat, and he swallowed hard, shoulders slumping. Each breath looked like agony. I watched tears roll down his cheeks, salt trails against the stubble of his jaw. A reporter pressed on. "What would you say to the people who trusted you?" His voice quivered as he answered, each sentence punctuated by regret. I felt a tightness in my chest, a coil of triumph and sorrow. He was unmasked, exposed in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The echo of his confession rippled through the plaza, and I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out. When he finished, the reporters buzzed, shouting follow-ups. He buried his face in his hands, body shaking, and sank to his knees once more, this time under the glare of every camera in town. My lips curved into a small, shaky smile. My own hands trembled so badly that I gripped the pillar until my knuckles turned white. I turned away, walking down the steps with shoulders stiff. Each footstep felt like a declaration, this was justice. Behind me, the sound of his voice faded into the night, swallowed by the rush of water and the flash of bulbs. I stepped into the car I'd parked nearby, spine straight, heart still pounding but steady. As I drove off, the plaza lights shrinking in my rearview mirror, I let out a long breath that I didn't even realize I was holding. That night, I slept with the news report playing softly on my phone, his confession echoing through the speakers. My body ached with the tension of it all, but beneath the fatigue, I felt a quiet, hard calm. Revenge had reached its climax, and his world lay in fragments. And in that fierce stillness, I finally tasted something like peace. I woke in my apartment the morning after the press conference, heart still racing from the adrenaline that had consumed me the night before. My body felt heavy, muscles drained, but my chest still throbbed with the echo of his confession. I lay in bed listening to distant horns and the hum of news alerts cascading across my phone, each ping a reminder that his world had fractured and mine was finally free. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, tasting relief and something like sorrow on my tongue. I slid out of bed, skin prickling as my feet met the cold floor. I wandered to the window and watched the sunrise bleed into the sky, bruised purples bleeding to pale gold. My reflection stared back, eyes hollowed by pain yet sharpened by purpose. I remembered the woman I'd been, trembling at the thought of accusations, of loss, and I smiled at her memory. I inhaled deeply, feeling the ghost of longing flicker in my chest before I shoved it down with a quiet determination. I had one last task. At my desk, I opened the bank's website and logged into our joint account. My fingers hovered above the keypad, palms slick. I typed transfer instructions, sliding the remaining balance into a new account under my sister's name. Each keystroke felt like sealing a tomb, a final farewell to the life we'd planned together. When I hit confirm, it sounded like a gunshot in the still room. My pulse thundered. I let the laptop close with a soft click. Next, I called his mother under the guise of a legal representative. My voice was calm, professional, when I told her I'd uncovered suspicious withdrawals from their joint investments, figures large enough to demand an inquiry. She gasped, breath shaky, promising to call her bank at once. I leaned back, chest swelling with a bittersweet triumph. When I hung up, I let out a slow exhale, watching the walls of my apartment dissolve as a new day dawned. By mid-afternoon, I slipped into his empty apartment with permission from the landlord. The lights stayed off, shadows pooled in corners. I walked from room to room, tracing the places he'd once called home. I gathered photos, us laughing under fairy lights, and small trinkets from vacations we'd planned. Each piece felt like a fractured promise. I packed them into a box labeled, "Return to Sender," and left it on his doorstep, along with a single note, "Here's what remains." That evening, I met my sister at our favorite cafe. My legs trembled as I sat, still buzzing with residual adrenaline. She reached across the table, eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure?" she asked. I traced the rim of my mug, swirling cream into patterns. "Yes," I said softly, voice steady. "It's over." A tear slipped free before I caught it, part relief, part grief. I smiled, surprising us both. "I'm free." We sat in companionable silence as the cafe hummed around us. The world outside carried on, oblivious to the storm that had torn through our lives. I felt the ache of exhaustion settle deep in my bones, but beneath it lay a stillness I hadn't known in months. When I stepped out into the night air, a cool breeze brushed my face, and I inhaled deeply, tasting possibility. The path ahead was unwritten, but I felt ready. His world lay in ruins, mine stretched before me, untouched, unclaimed, and utterly mine to shape. I let a soft smile tug at my lips as I walked home under the glow of streetlights. The weight in my chest had lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty. I had reclaimed my life from the ashes. I woke just as the sky was shifting from dark to those pale strokes of light. You know, that moment when nothing feels real yet everything is possible. My body felt both heavy and light, like I'd shed something but was still carrying its memory in my bones. I rolled out of bed, muscles stiff from restless sleep, and wandered into the kitchen without really thinking. The kettle hissed as I filled it, and I remembered how every small noise had become an alarm these past weeks, each creak, each footstep triggering my heart to spike. But today, the hiss felt ordinary, even comforting. I leaned against the counter, cupping the mug between my hands, feeling the warmth seep in through my palms. I stared out the window at the street below, empty at this hour, wondering if I'd finally escaped the echo of his footsteps. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, eyes a little brighter, shoulders less tense. I let out a breath that felt like the first in a lifetime, and I whispered, "It's mine now." I spent the late morning sorting through boxes of things I'd left unpacked, souvenirs from trips, gifts from friends, mementos of birthdays we'd never celebrate together. Each item pulled me back for a moment, made my chest tighten. A postcard from Paris with his scrawled note, "Wish you were here," made my hand shake. I slid it into an envelope marked "Return," then set it aside. With every object I touched, I felt the old life slipping further away, like an echo fading down a corridor. By midday, I was restless again. I needed air, needed to feel something living. I slipped into jeans and a leather jacket, keys cold in my hand, and walked to the riverbank where we'd once planned to build a life. The path was familiar, lined with willows brushing at the water's surface. The river ran steady and unbothered, carrying leaves and driftwood downstream without a care. I perched on a low stone wall, legs dangling, and watched the current. My fingers drummed on the cold rock as memories drifted in, his laughter, the weight of his hand in mine, promises spoken too easily. I felt a tear slip down but I let it fall, tasting both sorrow and relief in its salt. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my sister, "Meet me here. I need you." Within minutes, she was beside me, her presence like a steadying hand. We sat in silence, shoulders brushing. Finally she said, "You look lighter." I nodded, voice thick, "I am." My throat closed on the words, but she squeezed my hand and I exhaled. Together, we walked along the bank, talking about small things, her dog's new tricks, a recipe she discovered, plans for my birthday next month. Each word felt like a stitch in the tear he'd ripped in my life. I realized how much I'd missed normal, the quiet rhythms of every day. The world felt vast and welcoming again. Later, we detoured past the old chapel where it all began. It stood silent and empty, its doors locked. I traced the outline of the archway with my eyes, imagining roses draped there, refusing to imagine. My voice trembled, "I'm never going back." She nodded, a soft smile curved on her lips. "You don't have to." We left hand in hand, the chapel receding behind us like a closed chapter. I felt the weight of its doors drop shut inside me. As we stepped into the sunlight, my chest felt unburdened for the first time in forever. I looked at my sister and laughed, a short, sharp sound I almost didn't recognize as mine. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city's lights blink awake. The air was warm, carrying distant music and laughter from below. My skin tingled in the breeze, and I realized that revenge had done its work. The ache of betrayal still lingered, but it was softened by distance and time. I raised my glass to the horizon and whispered, "Here's to what comes next." No ghosts followed me home. Only promise. My hands still trembled when I stepped outside. It was a soft dusk, the sky bruised purple, and every breath felt electric against my skin. I tucked my phone into my pocket, its weight a reminder that someone was waiting for my next move. I'd thought the fallout from the press conference would settle things, but his silence had become a new kind of taunt, echoing in my mind. I found myself drawn to the river again, where currents whispered secrets and carried them away. My boots pressed into the cool gravel as I walked the winding path, shoulders tight with memory. Somewhere ahead, a lone street lamp flickered on, casting a pool of pale light. I paused, heart jangling like broken glass, and ran a shaky hand through my hair, feeling the scrape of my fingers against damp strands. A few steps later, I spotted him, leaning on the railing, eyes fixed on the water. His posture was hunched, as if the weight of every public confession still rested on his back. I swallowed, chest constricting, but I walked on, boots crunching softly. When he realized I was there, his shoulders jerked, and he turned toward me, eyes wide and pleading. I closed the distance slowly, each footfall measured. My palms felt slick against the leather of my jacket, and my lungs burned with anticipation. He tucked a strand of hair behind his ear, avoiding my gaze. The river's murmur filled the space between us, constant, unyielding. "Why are you here?" I asked, voice low enough that only he could hear. My throat felt raw, words scraping like stone. He swallowed hard, lips pressed in a thin line. I need to understand how to move on," he said, voice trembling. His words hit me like a blow, my jaw clenched, and I tasted copper on my tongue. Moving on, those words felt obscene coming from the man who'd fractured my heart. I took a breath, feeling the cold air slide past my lips. "There's nothing to understand," I said. My voice cracked, though I fought to keep it steady. "You made your choices." He shifted, running a hand along the railing until his knuckles whitened. "I want to make amends," he whispered, gaze flicking to the water. "Isn't that enough?" His plea trembled in the air, and for a moment I felt the old ache, compassion warring with fury. My chest tightened, heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it. My hands balled into fists at my sides. I stepped closer, closing the last bit of distance. My breath caught when I smelled the faint trace of his cologne, something warm and spicy. My stomach twisted. "Amends?" I echoed, voice low. "How do you plan to do that? By sending more flowers? More apologies?" He looked up, eyes glossy. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, voice cracking. "I'll go to therapy. I'll apologize to everyone I hurt." His shoulders sagged as the words tumbled out. "Please, just, give me a chance." I felt tears prick at my eyelids, a mixture of rage and something I didn't want to name. My skin felt hot, as though the dusk around us had turned to flame. I shook my head, shoulders stiff. "No," I said, each syllable sharp as a blade. "You don't get a chance. Not from me." His face crumpled, emotion flitting across his features, shame, desperation, maybe a flicker of understanding. He took a step forward, gaze pleading. "Why not?" he rasped. "What more do you want?" The river whispered beneath us, casting silver patterns on his shoes. I inhaled slowly, tasting fear and resolve. "I did what I needed," I said. "You've been stripped of everything. Your reputation, your relationships, your pride, you felt the fallout." I looked past him at the water, letting my words hang. "There's nothing left to punish." I turned away, boots echoing on the gravel. My heart pounded a steady rhythm, uneasy calm. Behind me, I heard him exhale, a soft sound that carried both relief and despair. I didn't look back. The dusk swallowed my silhouette as I walked, the river's song guiding me home. When I reached my door, I paused, hand on the knob, feeling the warmth of streetlight on my back. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the final ache of the day settle in my bones. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, leaving his pleas behind in the fading light, knowing that, at last, I was free of both revenge and regret. I stood at the threshold of our old apartment, keys cool in my palm. The door framed a hollow space, bare walls, echoes of laughter that no longer belonged to me. I inhaled slowly, tasting both fear and freedom on my tongue. My fingers trembled as I turned the lock and stepped inside, boots whispering against the hardwood. The silence pressed in on me. I dropped my bag by the door, chest tightening as I listened to the faint hum of the heater and distant cars. The apartment smelled faintly of him, cologne mingled with old coffee stains, but I didn't flinch. I let the scent wash over me, as though facing a ghost on my own terms. In the living room, the couch sagged where we'd collapsed after long days. My fingers itched to smooth the cushions, to reclaim this space. I straightened them and pictured art supplies on a new easel, houseplants trailing from the windowsill, sunlight dancing in here without guilt. That vision felt daring, like breathing after holding my breath too long. In the kitchen, I traced the chipped counter with my fingertips, recalling cold mornings when we'd quarreled over who'd make coffee. I opened the cabinet where his mugs still sat, each one a journal of promises, and packed them into a box labeled "Donate." My heart thundered, a tight coil unwrapping in my chest. I found the ring on the bedside table, tucked beside a stack of my own sleepless scribbles. The band was smooth beneath my fingers, empty of all vows. I pressed it to my lips, whispering "goodbye," then slid it into a velvet pouch. Outside, I would leave it on my sister's doorstep, a final severing of us. I moved to the bedroom. Daylight filtered through gauzy curtains, dust dancing in the beams. I opened the closet, his jackets long gone, and then arranged my own clothes forward, leather, denim, wool, each a layer of the woman I was becoming. I slipped into my favorite jacket, its weight a second skin. A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of new grass and distant laughter. It felt like a benediction. I crossed to the sill, leaning my folded arms on the cool wood, and peered down at the street, a world that had spun on without waiting. My lips curved into a soft smile. I paused in the hallway, noticing the wallpaper peeling at one corner, a small imperfection I'd never seen before. My heart fluttered as I smoothed the torn edge. It felt symbolic, like repairing something broken. My fingers warmed, and I stepped forward again, breath steadying. In the bathroom, the light flared to life and my reflection stared back, eyes softer around the edges, shoulders released from their tense arc. I pressed my palm to the mirror, feeling the smooth glass under my skin. The woman looking back was both familiar and new, tempered by sorrow, sharpened by purpose. On a corner shelf lay my journals, pages of frantic thoughts, plans for revenge, nights filled with doubt. I flipped through one, scrawled confessions and tears. My chest tightened. Then I closed it and placed it at the bottom of the stack. It could stay there, a testament to survival that I no longer needed to carry. My phone chirped, my sister's message, proud. My eyes blurred, but I blinked back tears. I typed, "I'm okay," and slipped the phone into my pocket. I stood in the center of the apartment, breathing in the quiet promise of empty rooms. No ghosts followed me here. Only space to fill with my own laughter, my own dreams. I walked to the door, hand on the knob, and looked back once more. Light streamed through the windows, painting the floor in gold. I smiled and stepped outside, closing the door on what was and stepping into what could be. My life was mine again, and I would write every new chapter on my own terms. That morning, I woke with the first real calm I'd felt in months, like the ache in my chest had finally loosened its grip. The sky outside was pale, filtered through sheer curtains, and I could hear the distant hum of life stirring below. I slid out of bed, muscles still warm from sleep, and padded barefoot across the cool floor. My toes curled at the sudden chill, and I realized how much I'd missed small comforts, the softness of sheets, the quiet breath of morning. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim and the painted daisies. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted it to my lips, and I let the warmth spread through my fingertips before tilting it back. The first sip tasted bitter and real, like the reckoning I'd lived through. I caught my reflection in the windowpane, a woman with bright eyes and a steady jaw, no longer defined by his betrayal. Later, I wandered through the city streets, letting my feet guide me. I passed a florist's window filled with peonies in soft shades of pink and white. I paused, watching droplets of water cling to petals, and felt the old thrill of revenge flicker and die. I realized I didn't want reminders of him, only reminders of resilience. I breathed in, tasting floral sweetness on the air, and stepped on. By afternoon, I reached the park bench where I'd once challenged him to meet me. It sat empty now, mottled with sunlight and leaf shadows. I ran a hand over its worn wood, remembering the tension that had crackled between us. But my heart no longer throbbed with anger or need. It rested easy, like a bird perched on calm water. I pulled out my phone and dialed my sister. Her voice came soft, familiar, and I laughed, quietly, almost in surprise at how light it sounded. We made plans for brunch at our favorite cafe. "I'm proud of you," she said, and her words felt like wings beneath my ribs. I hugged the bench as if it were an old friend, then rose, brushing off my jeans. A few blocks away, I found the cafe tucked between bookshops and bakeries. The smell of fresh bread and coffee greeted me like an embrace. I slipped inside, and the barista greeted me by name, a small kindness that felt huge. I ordered my usual, cappuccino with extra foam and a blueberry muffin. As I waited, I watched people around me, lovers leaning close, friends sharing jokes, strangers reading newspapers. Life went on, ordinary and beautiful. When my sister arrived, she slid into the seat opposite me, eyes sparkling. We talked about movies we wanted to see, a hike we'd take next weekend, her new job prospects. I felt the old tension melt away, replaced by a steady warmth that filled my chest. I leaned back, letting the sunlight from the window wash over my face, and I smiled without thinking. It was easy, natural, like breathing. That evening, I returned to the apartment I now called mine. I lit a single candle in the living room and opened my journal, blank pages waiting for new stories. My pen hovered, and I realized I didn't know where to begin. So I wrote a single line, "I am here." Then I paused, let the words settle, and wrote another, "I am whole." I closed the journal and tucked it beside the window, candlelight dancing on its cover. I stepped to the balcony, leaning against the railing, and looked out at the city lights blinking awake. The air was cool and steady. My skin tingled, not with vengeance, but with possibility. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with night air and hope. In that quiet moment, I understood that revenge had been my path to freedom, but now it was time to walk a new road, one carved by my own choices, my own dreams. I whispered to the darkness, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure who I thanked, myself, my sister, or the storm that had forged me stronger. I turned inside and blew out the candle. The apartment slipped into darkness, but I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Ready to step into tomorrow with open hands and an unburdened heart. The door closed softly behind me, and for the first time, I believed in the promise of new beginnings.